Hello, ma'am. Good evening.
Good
Uh,
evening.
let's bow down our head and feel the presence of the Lord in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, thank you for this day that you have given to us. Thank you for all the blessings that you showered upon us. Lord, as we do our review, please guide us and make this platform to be more informative, and all the strategies in test taking ay sana po makuha po namin. And also, we are asking also to forgive our sins po, lalo na po yung mga shortcomings po namin. And praying po sa lahat ng mga classmate ko, kung ano man po yung mga pinagdadaanan nila ngayon, ay maipanalo po nila yon. This we ask in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thanks. Thanks, Jerome. Do you mind also sharing yung mga ano muna natin? Because I think there are some others also who are first-timers. So we can just mention about yung POS natin. Ano? The resolution probably. Mauna mo na yan. Can you hear me well?
Yes po.
Okay. So that's the resolution. Okay. So this is rooted in the authority granted by the PRC Modernization Act, RA 89-821, and of course our RA 10587, which is the Environmental Planning Act. So this is resolution number 3, series of 2024, enacted by the Professional Regulatory Board of Environmental Planning. So that was last year, and it will be applied for the July 2025 licensure exam for environmental planners. So entitled Adoption, Issuance, and Promulgation of the Enhanced Tables of Specifications, or the TOC, for the subjects in the environmental planners licensure examination. So this was the reso, and then you can unshare, and we can show the annex in here. So that's the attachment, ano? So this is the attachment to that resolution, explaining the enhanced table of specifications, or the TOS, for the July 2025 ENP exam. So this is essentially the blueprint. For the exam, it tells you the breakdown of topics, the relative weight of each subject, and the kinds of thinking skills that will be tested. So it was published last year. So we go exactly to the main subjects and weights. So the exam covers 3 core subjects, each with its own weight in the total score. The first one is environmental planning processes, techniques, and strategies. So this is the heaviest part of the exam. It's almost half the questions. Almost half of the questions are here, and the focus of is on your ability to handle planning information, development planning, land use planning, and how you manage area development planning. So you'll be asked not only to define concepts, but also to analyze, apply, and even create solutions for planning problems. Exactly what you're looking at in the screen, and it says Bloom's taxonomy. There are 6 levels of the Bloom's taxonomy. Remembering, so you can see the columns there, the last 6 columns. We have the remembering level, understanding level, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So, and you have the breakdown. And anyway, I believe all of you have already copies of this. So, I don't need to go through the breakdown, but you can proceed to the next subject then. We have the history. I think it's history, concepts, theories, and principles of environmental planning. So this part checks your understanding of the roots and philosophy of the profession. It also covers the evolution of planning thought, global and local trends, city and regional planning concepts, and the ethics and advocacy expected of planners. So this is so you expect both historical recall and critical evaluation. Questions may ask you to appraise how planning evolved to or to relate a theory to today's urban problems. So the next part is so that's the lightest or the smallest part of the exam. So 45, 20. So we already have 65 and the last 35% is on. Then can you proceed to the next subject? Is the okay plan implementation, legal aspects, and plan administration and environmental planning. So that comprises 35%, and this section focuses on how plans are carried out, the legal rules that planners need to observe, and how planning works within government and public administration. You expect questions on laws, like primarily on the Environmental Planning Act of 2013. So I just mentioned earlier, that's RA 10587, the EIA law, procurement, and other environmental laws. So it will also ask questions on the mechanics of project management, then about public sector budgeting, and even professional practice like code of ethics, roles of planners, etc. So this is 35%. I think we are okay. We can go to the next. So everything is okay now here. It should be the last time that we will be sharing about this, because anyway, you can access Zoom recordings from Jen if officially registered. So you can, do you have that lecture 5? Because we've been tackling topics on central place theory early last night. So I would like to touch on at least 2 concepts tonight. So you can unshare that now. Okay. Jen, are you able to share? I think that's about, let me check. The theories of spatial planning. Jen, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Wait lang po.
Okay. 27 people here. So for those who have listened to this lecture, please bear with us. Some people are, yeah, maybe the first time that they're seeing this topic. Maybe you can enlarge, or meron pa bang ilalaki yan dyan? Okay. So, okay, theories of spatial planning. Or some are related, okay, to last night's yung mga board questions, yung past board questions on theories, and you can go to the next slide. So the next slide, please, spatial equilibrium. Okay, this is the actually the coverage of the entire topic. We have agricultural land rent, central place theory. So I will be doing 2 tonight, and then for tomorrow there would be 3. So this is quite long. So you can go. Meron pang ilalaki ito, Jen, if you can. Okay. So you go to the next slide. What's the next slide there? So, before I go to the specific agricultural land rent and central place theory, I'd like to define spatial equilibrium. So that's a concept in urban economics and planning. So I'll read that fears of spatial equilibrium describe market economy in Europe just before or just after the Industrial Revolution. Another one, cities are believed to be structured in a hierarchical system that's spatially balanced. So equilibrium here means big places are balanced by small places. Smaller places, big places feed on small places and vice versa. Don't move first. Uh, so what is the market economy context there? That it said theories of spatial equilibrium emerge as economists and planners sought to understand the spatial distribution of people and economic activity, particularly as industrialization disrupted all old settlement patterns and created new urban hierarchies. So also terminology there, hierarchical system or urban systems. In spatial equilibrium context, cities and towns are not viewed in isolation. So instead, they exist within a hierarchy. So you know what that means. And it means that some act as large, some act as central hubs, while others function as smaller supporting settlements. So there are different sizes there, which represent the hierarchy. And so the relationship among these places, which I just mentioned, like large, central hubs, and others are smaller. So the relationships among these places are dynamic but maintain a form of balance over time. So the spatial balance there, and that was defined in the last bullet, means big places are balanced by smaller places. So what's that spatial balance all about? Because the idea of being spatially balanced means that the flows of people, goods, services, information between larger and smaller cities reach a point where no individual or business has a strong incentive to relocate simply to improve their situation. This balance is rarely perfect, so or permanent, but it tends to reassert itself over time as people and firms seek out the most advantageous locations. Also, what else? We need to be really be clarified of the different definitions here. So the interdependence of big and small cities, that's actually a notion that big places feed on small places and vice versa. It reflects the mutual dependence between urban centers and their hinterlands. So hinterlands refer um, to the rural areas, the periphery, or in the US they call it, I forgot, but maybe I can remember next later. So also it touches on the notion that large cities draw resources, labor, and raw materials from surrounding smaller towns, while smaller towns benefit from the economic opportunities, services, and markets provided by larger cities. So this interdependence is not static. Uh, they are they're what's the opposite of static? That's dynamic. So, and there are many reasons about that. There's technological change, and when infrastructure improves, or when there are policy interventions that can disrupt the balance. But over time, the system tends to move back toward equilibrium. So that's the explanation about equilibrium. And this, when opportunities or living conditions become significantly better in one location compared to others, people and businesses will move until the advantages are dissipated by increased competition, higher costs, or congestion. So this movement is the self-correcting nature of spatial equilibrium. So it keeps moving, it keeps until it achieves that one that I mentioned about self-correcting nature of spatial equilibrium. So we can go to the next slide. Still, it's a continuation anyway. So I'll read the bullets. Centralized goods and services would be distributed evenly in a systematic pattern. So that's very clear in this theory. And that distribution is due to domination by large center. So in any functioning urban regional system, goods and services do not scatter randomly across space. Instead, they tend to be distributed in a highly organized, predictable manner. This systematic distribution is not by accident. It reflects the influence and domination of large urban centers or cities, which act as hubs for economic activity, governance, culture, and innovation. So, can you imagine what it means or what spatial equilibrium is trying to tell us? So, you can actually relate that the the current times that we are now in, because this one was kailan ito, anong year ito, but already it was already theorized about spatial equilibrium, and so I would like to continue that these large centers accumulate resources, talent, and capital, allowing them to provide a wide array of goods and services than smaller towns or rural areas. So we are now comparing big cities versus small towns. Over time, this creates a network where resources are pulled toward the center, but the benefits flow outward to smaller places as well. So that's ideal. That's the ideal scenario about the theory. This process forms the backbone of what we call spatial equilibrium. And so in the next bullet, it talks about central places. It says here they are unique because they can only develop under specific conditions of complementarity and balance. So three concepts. It means, therefore, that the term central place comes from central place theory. Okay? Most closely associated with, di ba? Last night, those who were present last night, there were questions there, and the correct answer in that particular question was, I think it was Sigford who answered Walter Christoller. And so now central place theory most closely associated with Walter Christoller, and according to Christoller, central places are not just the largest cities. They can be any settlement that provides goods and services to surrounding areas. What sets a central part or a central place apart is its role as a service provider to a defined hinterland. Suburban. So I remember now the word in the US, they call it suburban. So, and there are many equivalent terminologies anyway, hinterland, rural, and many more as we go along. Okay. However, not every place can become a central place. The emergence of central places depends on specific conditions, and what are these? Primarily complementarity, the ability to offer what the surrounding areas need, okay, being responsive. And another terminology is balance. not growing so large that the surrounding areas collapse, not so weak that they cannot provide services. So there was also here another statement or another theory that big place, a third bullet, big place and small place are interdependent. Central places have a relationship of mutual interdependence with their hinterlands, and central places depend totally on hinterland trade. So the relationship between central places and their hinterlands is best understood as one of mutual interdependence, such that big cities draw raw materials, food, labor, and other essentials from their surrounding hinterlands. In turn, the hinterlands rely on cities for specialized food goods, services, jobs, and access to wider markets. So this mutual dependence creates a delicate balance. Central places cannot thrive without the ongoing vitality of their hinterlands, just as rural or smaller urban areas need access to the goods, services, and opportunities found in the center or in the larger area. So this two-way relationship is fundamental to stable long-term development. And the last bullet, a city is the centralization or further convergence of multiple central places. I will repeat that. A city is the centralization or further convergence of multiple central places. So when we talk about a city, we are often referring to a complex. It means these are layered convergence of many central places. So they are collections of neighborhoods, commercial centers, specialized districts, and institutions, each acting as a central place within their own sphere of influence. In practice, this means that urban planners, must recognize and support this web of interconnected central places to keep the city functioning smoothly. So a city's health depends on the strength of its internal nodes and the flows that connect them, as well as on its external linkages to the broader region. So did you appreciate the convergence aspect and the interdependent and the mutual interdependence of central places and the hinterlands? So we can go to the next slide then. So there are assumptions here, that it said space is homogeneous, uniform topography, and climate, featureless plain. So it assumes, these theories assume that space is homogeneous, meaning the land is perfectly flat, the climate is uniform, and there are no mountains, there are no rivers, or other features to get in the way. So that's the theory, or the assumption. It's as if we're planning on a giant or a featureless plain. So we planners, as planners, we know that that's rare, that's unrealistic. So, and the second assumption is fertility of land or the value of soil is constant and uniform. Yield per unit acre is the same everywhere. So that's another assumption that the models imagine that the fertility of the land is constant and uniform everywhere. In other words, whether you're on one side of the map or the other, the soil gives you the exact same yield. per acre. Again, we know from experience, especially in Philippines, that land quality can vary drastically from one place to another. So next one is on price. Price P is the same for all producers of a given crop. So it assumes that price is the same for all producers of a given crop. So no one gets a better deal or suffers a worse market. Everyone sells at the same price, which simply doesn't happen given all the factors at play in real markets. So again, that's an unrealistic. That's why it's just called an assumption. And we go to the next. Market is relatively isolated from other markets. So this also theory treats the market as isolated, as if people in one region aren't trading, aren't communicating, or competing with those in other regions. In reality, especially now, no market is truly isolated. So the last one is on friction of distance. Last assumption of this theory. 1, 2, 3 bullets. Okay, under friction of distance, it says distance is reduced mathematically to transportation costs. Transportation costs are proportional to distance and invariant to direction. Space can be traveled equally in every direction from the market space. So, such a mouthful, diba? So, let me go one by one. So, distance is simply translated into transportation cost. So, if you double the distance, you double the cost. So, that's what it means. It doesn't matter which direction you go, the effort, the expense, and the travel time are all assumed to be the same. In practice, we know this isn't true. Roads, terrain, weather, and infrastructure all change the real cost and time needed to move goods and people. So while these assumptions help simplify complex systems and make theories easier to work with, they do create problems when we try to apply them directly to actual planning scenarios. And that's why it's so important for us as planners to recognize the limitations of these models and adjust for more realistic conditions. So we go to the next slide, a continuation of the, meron pa palang assumptions here. Okay, let's read that. There is perfectly free market competition. Goods are completely sold for profit. What does it mean what do you mean by this one? That means every producer is free to sell their goods without barriers and everything gets sold for a profit. In real life, we know that that's rarely the case because markets aren't perfectly free. There are regulations, monopolies happen, cartels also, government interventions, and sometimes simple lack of buyers. And then the second bullet, economic determinism. So we must know. I think it was during my batch, it was during my time that this one was asked in the board about what is economic determinism. So ABCD. And it says here, man as Homo economus is said to be driven only by the pursuit of profit. Such view is now rejected by many schools of thought. So humans, so there's this idea of economic determinism. Here, humans are boiled down to Homo economicus, which means the rational economic actor who is motivated purely by the pursuit of profit. So that's what. So it's an idea for modeling, but it just doesn't hold because people make decisions for all sorts of reasons, for family, tradition, risk, even environmental or community values. So many schools of thought today reject the idea that profit is the only driver. And so the third one there, producers, meaning farmers and businessmen, are profit maximizers and cannot be content with anything less than maximum profit. So these theories picture all producers, so whether they're farmers, business owners, or anyone else, as pure profit maximizers. In other words, they're never satisfied with anything less than the maximum possible profit. Again, the reality is more complicated. Some producers care about stability, some about legacy, others about work-life balance or stewardship of the land, probably. So what's the takeaway here? These assumptions about perfect competition, economic determinism, and relentless profit seeking might have described some parts of Europe during certain points in history, but they certainly don't apply everywhere at all times. As planners, we have to be mindful that these theories are starting points, not universal laws. So we can go to the next slide. Probably that's the start of one of the still hindi siya nakikita na. But okay. So it's called agricultural land rent theory. It's a popular theory. And this was theorized by von Thunen, but Johann it says it, but it's pronounced Johann Heinrich von Thunen. So this was it was published 1842 and then 1896. And I'd like to read the first one. Land with greatest demand is the one nearest to the market because of low transport costs. It is the land with highest rent and value per acre. So this model is over, 180 years old. So can you compute that? But the core ideas still show up in planning and land economics today. Von Thunen started with a simple but powerful observation that land that's closest to the market, so he has that concentric model there. So the land that's closest to the market, either city or town center, is the most valuable. Why? Because transport costs are lowest. Farmers near the city spend less moving their goods to market, so they can afford to pay higher rents. And this makes the land right next to the market the most expensive and in greatest demand. So von Thunen visualized this using concentric rings around a central market. Each ring represented a different type of agricultural activity organized according to how perishable the product is, how intensive the land use is, and crucially, how expensive it is to transport those goods to the city. So the innermost ring here, can you look closely at the concentric circles? The innermost rings closest to the market are for crops or products that spoil quickly. So that's the perishables. Or are expensive to move, like vegetables, dairy, or fresh produce. So as you move farther out, you get into forestry or field crops, which can survive longer, transport times, or are cheaper to move in bulk. The outermost rings are reserved for uses like grazing, which don't depend as much on quick market access and can tolerate lower land values because transport costs eat up a bigger share of the profit. So in the outer belts, there's much less demand for land because transport costs are high. Rents drop, okay, toward the outer belt, and the only activities that make sense here are the ones that can survive with those thin profit margins. So again, what does this tell us as planners? Von Thunen's model, even in its simplicity, reminds us that distance from the city's powerful force in shaping land use and value. The closer you are to the center, the more intense and valuable the land use tends to be. It also highlights the importance of transportation infrastructure, such as new roads or railways, can redraw these rings, making once remote areas suddenly more accessible and valuable. Uh, so we can go to the next slide, this continuation sa again. Okay, still agricultural land rent theory. It says here, Von Thunen explained differences in the intensity of production of a particular crop and the distribution of different crops relative to the market center. So he noticed, Von Thunen noticed that um, not all, or what really set his work apart is how he explained the differences in intensity of production. So as you move away, so that's his idea. So move away from the market center and how different crops end up distributed across the landscape. So he noticed that not all land is used in the same way, and that the reason has a lot to do with transport costs and the perishability. So the most intensive uses like vegetable gardens or dairy. So they cluster right up next to the market. Can you see that? And that's because these products also, as I mentioned earlier, it spoils quickly. So here we also it Von Thunen also said intensity of production and type of land use varies with increasing distance. So it's the same from what I mentioned earlier. We can go to about land use because it also mentioned about land use that that because of every extra kilometer adds to your transport costs, and only certain crops or land uses can absorb those higher costs and still make sense financially. So Von Thunen's model is simple, but it's a great way to illustrate how economic logic shapes the physical pattern of land use even today. So of course, more realistic land use patterns are even should I describe it as it's it's more chaotic or measure, but the basic logic holds that high value perishable goods stay close to the market and extensive lower value uses move further out. So we can go to the next one. So there's the diagram there. And it shows the ano kaya yan, ano? So maybe we can fit into the screen dyan, no? Hindi ka makita. Pwede ba siyang paliitin konti? Because it's too, ayan, ganyan. Sige, that is okay now. So the diagram and table show how land rent for different crops changes as you move farther from the market center. So rent as the amount a farmer is willing to pay for a particular piece of land based on how much profit they can make after considering transport costs. So can you consider the diagram? So this means that the closer you are to the city, the higher the rent because you spend less getting your goods to market. So in this example, we have three crops. Crop A, B, C, three pala yan. A, B, C, D. So there are four. So crop A may be something highly perishable, like vegetables, or maybe flowers. And so B also, let's say it's about yung grains, so, and then yung crop C, perhaps something that travels well and doesn't spoil quickly. So the table lists several variables also. R is the base rent. Okay, R is the base rent. Potentially profitability before transport. So P is the market price per unit. And then T is the transport cost per unit per distance. And then DO is the maximum distance from the market at which the crop can still be profitably produced. So if you look at the graph, you'll see that each line slopes down as you move away, di ba? Habang lumalayo ito. When slope down moves down or slopes down as you move away from the market. So that's because transport costs, kinakain niya lahat yung profit, ano? So the rent you're willing to pay drops the farther you go. Okay, so you also notice that each crop dominates a certain ring around the city. Kita niya yung ano niya, no? Depending on where its profitability is highest. So when the rent line for one crop drops below another, so that's where the land use shifts from one crop to another. So it's about, and that's why it's called agricultural land rent theory by von Thunen. So what's the overall effect? The most perishable, yun pa din yan, the most perishable or high value crops are grown closest to the market, paying the highest rent as you move away. Crops that can handle distance better, meaning the lowest transport cost or less perishability take over. So you can see there. Okay. So maybe we can go to the last slide about von Thunen. So in the context of agricultural land use planning, and you can see it said actual agricultural land use planning in most countries deviates significantly from von Thunen's, so it's not concentric. And there are reasons there, like because like the landscape isn't perfectly flat or featureless, and farmers and land users have to deal with rivers, hills, and varying soil types. So there are also forested areas and all kinds of natural obstacles. So these natural features like rivers or the contours of hills and forest edges play a huge role in how land is actually used. So crops aren't chosen just based on how close they are to the market. Instead, it's often about where the soil is richest. So it is trying to provide now what's really happening and the actual practice that it is saying that in practice actual agricultural land use planning it doesn't reflect the von Thunen's model. Okay, it also mentions, so what are the highlights here, that in reality there isn't just one isolated center or one big market, because Von Tunen is considering only one center or one big market in his concentric model. So in reality, there are multiple markets, big and small cities. So there are also alternative hubs apart from the big markets. So also, the big key point or another key point here is that farmers are not always aiming to maximize profit like the economic models assume. Meron tayong terminology as what we call satisficers. Many are, they're content with a good enough yield. So rather than always pushing for the maximum possible output or profit. So I'm trying to explain these are the critics of Von Thunen's agricultural land use model, and it provides all this more realistic condition. So, for example, farmers consider intrinsic values, meaning maybe farming is a tradition or gives personal satisfaction to them. So that's intrinsic values. Yung nakalagay dito sa last four bullets. And then expressive values is also some want to grow a certain crop to express their identity or family heritage. So that's a means of self-expression. Then there are what we call the instrumental values. Instrumental values, of course, it's about earning income. Earning income still matters. So mostly, so that's what we are. That's what we are working for, right? So, how about social values that it is expressing here? Farming might also be about family, community, or relationships with neighbors. And so it says here, done for sake of interpersonal relationships. So that's why when you look at real agricultural landscape, you'll often see a mix of different crops, right? Some following rivers, others group near secondary towns or markets. So the classic model becomes distorted, this model. And so land use responds to local conditions. And a variety of human motivations, a lot more. And that's why these values were also mentioned here. So Von Thunen's theory was a good starting point, even during this time when this was theorized. But it's just that it's the more realistic agricultural land use is much more dynamic and more unorganized, shaped by both the land itself and the people who work for it. So okay, so I hope you learned from this agricultural land use theory of Von Thunen. So probably you can answer. There are two questions here. You already know about this theory, what the critics are and what the limitations are, and what were the assumptions. Okay, then for the central place theory, Jen, can we move to the next slide? Okay. This was also one of so ito yung answer to the question. Ano na yun, Sigfrid? So ito yung, there was a question about central place theory in last night's lecture. So Walter Christoller is actually a very famous thinker in 1930s. this theory helps explain why cities, towns, and villages are distributed the way they are, and why some grow large and while some stay small. So, what's the central place? It's any settlement. Okay, that's one thing sure. It's any settlement, whether it's a village, it's a town, or city. That acts as a hub for local trade and exchange. People come here to buy and sell goods, access services, and connect with others. In short, it's the community's marketplace. Okay. So there's another terminology there, hinterland. So it was defined in this slide. It's the surrounding area. Okay, this is important actually. You need to imagine strongly. Hinterland is the surrounding area or market area being served by a marketplace. It is a large tributary. So we are think of it like a catchment zone. People from this area travel to the central place for their needs. In economic terms, it's the tributary that feeds into the central hub. Now, Christoller observed that people tend to cluster around these central places, and over time, you get a hierarchy of settlements. So, okay. In the third bullet, there's clustering. Okay, there's clustering of human population around central places through a time until a hierarchy of settlements appears that corresponds to the market's needs for low level to high level services. So, you might have small barangays or towns, but only a handful of big cities in a region. So Walter Christoller wants planners to anticipate where people will settle during this time and how to distribute services, and why not every town or and why not every town becomes a city. So it's also useful for infrastructure planning, know where to build roads, hospitals, and schools depending on the role each place plays in the overall work network. So Walter Christoller, I think we can see also theorize here that the larger the settlements, the fewer their numbers. So we can continue to the next slide. So we will understand what he meant by that. Okay. And he said the larger settlement, the farther away a similar size settlement is. So, for example, you don't see two big cities right next to each other. Meron bang ganon? Or, well, in metropolitan areas, so in reality probably, but Walter Christoller saw that, and he theorized there's usually some distance between them. That the smaller the settlement, the more likely it is to be surrounded by other small towns or villages. Also about population, he theorized the range of market increases as the population increases. So because it's market area or the reach of the reach REACH, okay, so the reach of its influence gets bigger too, okay. So a large city doesn't just serve its own residents. People from surrounding areas come in for higher level services or specialized shops, hospitals, universities, and so on. So it's actually we can relate it because in Philippines, for example, especially in smaller cities. Kapag may mag-open na like Jollibee, or the first time that we are experiencing, we are seeing large malls being established like SM, etc., Robinsons. So even if we come from a farther city or municipality, then we are, even if we're used to, visiting Manila, Cebu, Davao, but still right in our hometown, if we see the establishment of these bigger malls, and because we've not seen this the for for many decades, and so we patronize, right? We're willing to travel, even if it means traveling 5 hours, so we can do that, because we get excited about, and that's what Walter Kistoller is trying to, explain, that a large city doesn't just serve its own residents. People from surrounding areas come in for higher level services or specialized shops, hospitals, universities, and many more. And also, in the last bullet here, the larger the settlement, the higher the order of its services. Okay? Deviations to this rule are, so that these are the exceptions that, oops, nawala, share. Ay, Jen, nawala? Jen? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Ayan, nawala ba?
Hindi po.
Okay. Because I was trying to tap it. Ginaganyan ko, and nagalaw ko pala, so I moved it. I was staying the gallery. Anyway, so these are the exceptions. Tourist resorts that have small population but large number of functions. So that's one. Can we say Palawan or El Nido, yung mga resorts natin, ano? It's a small population. It has small population, but the functions are equivalent to those in, like high end resorts that we have in Manila. And then another one is dormitory town. So it's a remember, this is a technical term, okay? Dormitory towns that have a large population but a small number of functions. So basic services. So what are these? Sari-sari store or elementary schools. So they are found in almost every barangay. So, or village. We're not using barangay here as a terminology, but village. So higher order services like tertiary hospitals, universities, or specialized markets are found only in larger towns or cities. But Walter Kistoller is telling us that there are exceptions to this pattern, that some tourist destinations might be small in terms of resident population but offer a huge variety of services and amenities. Diba? Boracay could be one, or Coron. So on the flip side, you might have dormitory towns. So that's what he said. So what do we mean by dormitory town? You for example, Bulacan is a province, so especially those closest, those municipalities closest to Metro Manila, they just sleep there, and because they work in Makati, somewhere in Makati, BGC, so, and that makes it a dormitory town because they do most of their activities in Metro Manila, especially those who are working in Makati. And so they just sleep there, and that makes their town a municipality, a dormitory town. So while Cristoller's model gives us a general pattern, there are some more realistic settlements that can deviate for various reasons, such as tourism or commuting patterns. So because he mentioned about dormitory towns. So we can go to the next slide then. I think that's the last one or meron pa. Sige, konti na lang to. There are as many size classes of cities as markets. So this is the urban hierarchy model. So in any given region, you'll find a range of settlement sizes, so each playing a different role in the economy. So that's the meaning. And then cities of the same order have similar economic characteristics and population sizes. So if you compare two cities of the same level, you'll often see they provide about the same kinds of services and have roughly similar populations. Then the third one, higher order cities have all the services of a lower order city plus functions that they export to lower order cities. Meaning that the higher you go is you think of it like a pyramid, that the higher you go, the more specialized and diverse the services become. So these cities even export specialized services to the smaller cities below them. And then smaller cities have smaller hinterlands and are closer together, means that because they serve fewer people and offer basic services, there's less need for people to travel far. So these towns cluster more tightly across the landscape. Central places, number 5, central places of the same order will be equally spaced across the regional or national landscape. It's rare to see, I think I already mentioned this, that it's rare to see within this theory, okay, to see two large cities right next to each other, because spacing allows each one to serve its own market area without too much overlap. So they overlap if this becomes, like same, if there are cases like this, so and they stay close to each other, and so there's competition, there's overlap, and most likely the other will suffer if you see it that way, if it's happening in reality, right? But we are talking about the urban hierarchy model of Walter Christoller. So commodities, number 6, commodities generally do not flow up the hierarchy. So this, according to Christoller, means that goods and services typically move from higher to lower order cities and not the other way around. Because baka in the exam, it might ask about this model, the central place theory, and you need to cluster, or so among the options you need to identify which does not belong to the characteristics of the urban hierarchy model. So we need to really imagine the characteristics of the central place theory as mentioned here. So the big point is, well, this is a really useful way to think about city networks and regional planning, but let's remember it's not a perfect model. And that's why for each model, it also depicts, or it mentions, or it states all the assumptions, the criticism also. Okay, so maybe we can go to the next one. Meron pa pala dyan about the hexagonal. I remember last night we were talking about hexagons and why it's the illustration of the central place theory. So producers and distance here, producers are willing to travel up to a point A. Can you see AB? AB. Mayroong din C. So C, it's the center. So producers are willing to travel up to point A to purchase from the other producers. So, first Christoller actually noted that producers or businesses are only willing to travel a certain distance, so let's call it point A, to buy supplies or sell their goods to other producers. So they want efficiency. So distance matters here. And number two, with improved transport and communication, consumers willing to travel farther to be. So when transport and communication improve, people are willing to travel farther. Now they might reach point B instead of stopping at A. This means consumers can access more services and markets, and central places can serve a wider area. So that's the impact of better transport and communication. Then third, market areas overlap. So in reality, these market areas aren't perfectly separated. They overlap. So meaning people might choose between two or more centers depending on their needs, transport options, or service quality. So why hexagon? So I asked you last night, diba? So I'm checking the time. I'm I'll make sure I'm not talking about last night, baka 12 midnight na tayo, no? So I may not be accurate on telling last night. So number four, okay, I want to read this one first. Development of hexagonal market areas around a system of central places, tangential spheres are more efficient. So there are 2 points there. That why hexagons? I go back to that question. Why hexagons? Christoller's big contribution was the idea that if you want to cover an area efficiently without gaps or too much overlap, you don't use circles. You use hexagons. Nakita mo yung na-maximize na yung space, ano? Sa dikit-dikit siya. And hexagonal market areas fit together seamlessly, covering the whole region and letting every point be as close as possible to the center. So the diagrams on your slide show how these hexagons tile the landscape, each one centered on a central place, isn't it? So number 5, creation of higher order and lower order services. Not all centers are equal. So as you move up the urban hierarchy, some places become higher order centers, offering more specialized goods and services. So we are talking about goods and services regarding higher order and lower order. Please don't make a mistake. So and others remain lower order, serving everyday needs. So why does this matter? Because it helps us visualize why some towns grow faster, why some services are clustered in big cities, and how transport improvements like new roads or better communications change how far people are willing to travel for different goods or services. So it also gives us a geometric framework for thinking about the efficient placement of facilities, the schools, hospitals, markets, and more. So this one. So in the next slide, Jen, this was how the board exam was framed in previous years. Itong mismong ito, if you notice, okay, sa baba ng picture, figure 7.1, service activities, hierarchy, threshold, and range. And so this was from a page of a book, the book by BJL Berry. So nakalagay source, adapted from BJL Berry from the Geography of Market Centers and Retail Distribution, page 28. So nasa libro ito, and yan din yung dinikit nila, dinikit ba? yung pinrint nila in the test question. And so questions were asked after the illustration. So, and when I saw it, pero I saw this illustration before I took the exam. So what I'm trying to say is, nabasa ko because I was in SORP, and so ginamit din ng School of Urban and Regional Planning ito. And so swerte mo if you were a student of School of Urban, kasi lahat ng ginagamit yun din yung ano. But I'm not telling na exclusive lang naman during my time in the 1990s. So isa lang naman nag-o-offer ng urban and regional planning during that time. So I saw this before I took the exam. So siyempre ma-answeran mo, di ba? And I did not become ignorant about ano itong VVVTC, ganyan. So if it's the first time you're saying this, probably hindi mo yan magigets, di ba? Ano kaya itong V, ano itong T, itong C. So yan is represents village, and then T town, and then C city. So okay, so 'di ba it's weird, so we don't do this type of illustrating some models. Hindi ganito. Mas high-tech na tayo ngayon, di ba? We're more organized this time. So, if babasahin ko yan, systematic pattern of central places is evenly spaced. Kasi distance distance matters in this model. So, systematic pattern of central places is evenly spaced and surrounded by hexagonally shaped market areas. So what do we mean by that? Explain the hierarchy of central places. So in this theory, central places, I'll just drink water. Okay. Towns, cities, and villages in this theory are laid out in a very systematic way, evenly spaced across the landscape. So each one is surrounded by its own hexagon shaped market area, a shape that fits neatly together with no gaps, di ba? Yun. Just like honeycomb, do you know what's a honeycomb? So this layout makes sure that people in every area have access to the goods and services they need with as little overlap or wasted space as possible. So here, service activities are organized by order. So ano kaya itong order? First, low order services are the basics. Low order services are the basics, like sari-sari store, small groceries, gas stations, post office. Meron pa bang post office? Meron pa, di ba? These are found in nearly every community or village. So it means it's common. And because almost everyone needs them, and you don't have to travel far. So compared with high order services where it's described as more specialized, like hospitals, universities, big department stores, malls. So these need a larger population to stay open or to stay alive, or so you'll only find them in larger towns or cities. So here in this diagram shows this hierarchy. Village level services, okay? Village level services have the smallest market areas and can survive with a small population. Then as you go up the hierarchy, town level services need a bit more people, so their market area is wider. City level services are the rarest and have the biggest market areas, serving people from many towns and villages. So was a practical detail from Christoller's work. The lowest rank centers means the smallest villages or service points were likely to be spaced about 7 kilometers apart. Okay, baka tanungin din sa board yan how many kilometers apart according to Christoller, that these lowest rank services like the villages should be spaced. So answer 7 kilometers apart. So that was in the theory. And this reflects how far people are generally willing to travel for everyday necessities. And the big picture here is the higher up you go in hierarchy, the fewer centers there are. And the farther apart they get. Okay? So mas spaced sila. Mas spaced out sila. The bigger and more specialized the service, the more people it needs to support it. So bigger population should be supporting this one because they are more specialized as a service, and the bigger its reach. So, did you understand this diagram? Okay. We can go to the next. Ito din. This slide and the next slide din. Hindi. Next one, na doble. Actually, this is a scaleogram as measure of centrality. Again, in your board exam, wala pang colored hanggang 2024. So, it must be expensive, di ba? Pag mag-colored sila. So, this was how it was shown in the board exam. Ganito din, copy-paste. Okay? Copy-pasted din ito. And if you're not really very keen or if you're not very observant here, you cannot answer. Because it said in the legend, function dito sa upper left. Okay. Function present. Okay. Function absent. Okay. So, if I asked you, which is the most, which city has the most number of functions? Palakihin nga. So, if that's the question, ano yung i-answer nyo? Unmute. Was it the city or town with the greatest population? Pero nakita nyo, di ba? Meron, sorry?
Naga, ma'am. Naga po, ma'am.
Naga. Pero hindi siya yung pinakamalaki, di ba?
Building. Yes po, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So, ano yung nakikita nyo? Dahil full block siya, di ba?
Opo, ma'am.
Okay. So, you must be dapat careful kayo kasi sayang naman yung 1 point, di ba? Pag hindi nyo makuha. And so, a scaleogram, therefore, is basically a matrix that helps us measure and visualize centrality. Okay, it measures centrality. And so, it shows which towns or cities offer which services and helps us see at a glance which places serve as higher order centers and which ones are more basic. So higher orders, we're talking about the services and the goods. So in the left, you can see the cities there in the left, and then the population. So largest population at the top. So nakita din niyo yung population doon. Ano pa ba? And then yung mga paano yun, yung pagkasulat niya is baliktad siya, no? So, vertical. So, you can see all those different functions or services. So, yung black box means the service or functions present. So, you also need to understand, especially in tables, graphs, you need to understand the legend. So yun yung una ninyong hanapin because it will matter for you to answer quickly. So yung puti doon, so it's absent. So what else? So it's a quick way to identify which towns serve as hubs and which might be underserved. It also, kasi parang ano lang ito parang laro lang, no? But it matters a lot. I'm not sure if some of you here are using it in your CLUP or barangay. Maybe you can teach your barangay officials how to do this, or provide siguro Excel or table siguro. Okay. So it helps you prioritize investments as well. If a growing town has a lot of white boxes, so but its population is increasing, so it may need a few, or it may need new facilities or services. It also shows functional gaps, areas where people are likely traveling far just to get essential goods or services. So in short, the scaleogram gives us a visual, data-driven way to assess centrality, making the urban hierarchy and central place theories much more tangible and useful in practice. So, few slides, Jen. Next. Now you can see this face of Walter Christoller. Baka sakali it can be helpful for you to remember him. Walter Christoller. So, mukhang mabait, ano? Meron yun din yung mukhang hindi mabait. So, at least makakatulong in remembering. So, and this is the usefulness of central place theory. Theory stresses relevance of market area to the size of a town's population. So it's directly related to how big its market area is, and larger towns have bigger market areas and can support more and higher level services. So theory highlights the importance of situation rather than site conditions. So in planning, this means thinking about how settlement fits into the bigger network, not just what's inside the borders, its borders. And the theory introduces us to the concept of urban hierarchy. It helps us see how different cities and towns form an integrated system, each with its own role. Some as local centers, so that's the role that it plays, and others as regional hubs. So it's a way of making sense of the mix of large cities, small towns, and everything in between. The rank size rule, it said theory led to the introduction of the rank size rule. So this was the predecessor theory of the rank size rule. And why it's important? Because the rank size rule describes how the sizes of cities tend to follow a predictable pattern, where the largest city is about twice as big as the second largest, 3 times as big as the third, and so forth and so on. So that's the rank size rule, because yun man yung susunod na topic natin for tomorrow. Now, theories serve as basis for administering urban regions and for allocating resources. Allocative. Di ba last night, we have that allocative, parang ganun na as concept. So, anyway, in practice, this theory helps planners and policymakers decide where to allocate resources, where to invest in infrastructure, so that what it means, and how to administer urban regions efficiently. And so if you know which places are truly central, or the central or the CBD, you can make smarter decisions about where to build new hospitals, schools, or transportation links. Otherwise, there must be more credible and more accurate referencing for this purpose. So you may, in your reporting, like for example, you're preparing a CLUP or any planning article or anything that you want to write, and if you feel that the central place theory would be relevant in your writing, and then you can discuss a little about Walter Christoller and how he thought about the cities, the larger cities versus the smaller cities, and so it will make your report, it will make your work, your written work more credible, because you were capable, and you were enthusiastic, or you showed high interest in mentioning history and theory, and incorporating them in your work. So let me go to the last point here. Provides a framework for understanding regional spatial structure. So we know how a framework works. That this is actually, so it gave us a basic framework for understanding the spatial structure of regions, how places are connected, why some grow while others stay small, and how to foster a balanced regional development. So, how about limitations, Jen? Maybe that's the last limits, the limits of central place theory. Okay. Move to the next slide. Okay. So the central place theory, or the CPT, it assumes all towns and cities are set on a perfectly flat, uniform plane, so that we already discussed that. But in reality, terrain varies. So there are mountains, rivers, and all sorts of environmental barriers. And so the theory ignores how soil quality, climate, topography, blah, 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 actually affect where settlements and services develop. So the theory also assumes that production inputs like labor, capital, raw materials, many more, are available everywhere and cost the same. And that's rarely the case, because some areas have rich resources, others don't. Static, it says static. And so central place theory is basically a snapshot of an unchanging, steady state economy. It doesn't account for government intervention. So did you notice that for this theory, no government intervention was made, or and it's also because it's a static model, so it shifts. It doesn't account also for shifting social classes. It doesn't account for technological change, or economic shocks. Also, the theory, the model assumes you can travel in any direction with equal ease, and transport costs are always the same. So, but we all know that's not true, because it depends on road quality, geography, infrastructure. They all create differences, in accessibility and cost. So, how about population? The theory treats population as evenly spread out, with everyone having the same purchasing power and demand for goods. But in reality, people cluster for jobs, culture, amenities, and income, and demand are far from equal. So linear, single good market. It says here, the central place theory started with the idea of a single market good. Okay, there's one. So it assumes that single market good, but real economies offer a huge mix of goods and services, each with different supply chains, demand, and service requirements. And so the theory also assumes all producers always try to maximize profits and all consumers are perfectly rational in minimizing their costs. But as we see every day, people make decisions for lots of reasons, not just money. So bottom line, central place theory, it's still a useful framework for seeing patterns and organizing the kind of thinking that we need, but it's not a mirror of reality. So but of course we need to we still discuss that because it provides foundation to our field, to the body of knowledge in our field. So yeah, last one, promise. Last slide. So we can end in that slide that the theory expects everyone to shop at the nearest center, but in reality, people don't always behave that way. There are shopping externalities like when complementary goods are only available in a bigger or more distant market. So, or when people prefer to shop at a mall with more choices. So even if it's so far, so even if it takes you uh to fly, diba, you still chase what you want to buy. And so central place theory ignores that variable or that condition, which we can say that they're more complex than what the theory is telling us. The theory also misses how some places develop unique specializations, like a town famous for furniture, for example, or for pottery or fishing. So it did not consider that. But real economies aren't, they have special roles and niches. So we have niche business or niche industries, okay, to reckon with. How about manufacturing? Manufacturing and resource-based towns. So according to central place theory, the settlements grow around markets for goods and services, but in reality, some cities grow because they sit on top of valuable resources like gold, minerals, or a major port. So even if the local consumer market is small, so manufacturing and extractive industries can create central places that look nothing like the theory predicts. So the theory also doesn't take into account what happens when there's a big influx of people, like during a mining boom or when rural workers move to cities for jobs. As this population surges can rapidly change the hierarchy and size of places. So, and there are many more deviations to consider, like history, even if they are smaller, but they have unique historical events, so people would really have more interest in going to that place. And then for government, for example, if they have economic zones, so that's why economic zones could be a good material for research if um, it could draw interest really from investors, even if it's smaller or has less potential than other cities. So you can also there are it could be one of the reasons when investments, incentives, or even political boundaries can change settlement patterns when you have places of interest like that, especially economically. So social class, income differences, and patterns of wealth distribution can affect also where services are located and who can access them. Also topography, mountains, rivers, coastlines, they can override all the all those normal reasons or normal conditions, and then when they could draw, or they can force settlements to cluster in an unexpected way. So central place theory is helpful. Is a helpful starting point, but we always need to adjust it based on local realities and context. So for planners, we must know also how to recognize the limitations. It's just as important as knowing the strengths of the theory. So that, I think that's all for tonight, Jen. I will continue that tomorrow. Thanks everyone.